Today we take a look at the very first official licensed video game based on the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, the 1982 Hobbit text adventure game. It has been released on quite a big variety of personal computers, but from what I gathered they all play the same and the difference is just in the graphical quality of images. So I wouldn't say that there is a particular definitive version of this title, though this video will be based on the Commodore 64 disc version released in 1985, because it has music and the biggest amount of images with the best quality, so you might say that is the definitive version. Now, at first glance the whole game may seem a bit primitive, but let's be absolutely clear. The Hobbit is probably one of the most ambitious games of its time, and even in our days what it tried to achieve would be considered extremely ambitious as well. To explain why, let's start dissecting the game, as always with the help of my Stasocritic scoring system. My name is Stanislav Costiuc, I am a game designer, and this is my review of The Hobbit, a software adventure. We start with design. This is the most important category with the biggest weight, pretty much for obvious reasons. Video games are defined by interactivity, and design is all about how you use interactivity to create an enjoyable experience. We dissect the game design starting from high-level vision and make our way towards low-level mechanics. And The Hobbit's high-level vision is something. Of course, being an adaptation of the book, recreation of the source material story and experience is very important. But it's not just repeating events the way they were written, it wants to make sure you build your own adventure. And the game tries to achieve that by creating a living world where every character has their own agency. And that's how The Hobbit gets its core pillars. I want to point out two things here. First, this general approach is probably the most correct way to create a game adaptation of an existing story. What is important is not just to have an interactive version of the original's events, but recreate the feelings, principles and themes, even if the events themselves can change due to interactivity. And the second thing I want to point out is a living world where characters have their own agency in a text adventure game from 1982? Sounds insane, but it's true. As well as rudimentary physics simulation where every object and character have different strengths, heights, weights, all of which affect whether certain actions are possible. And things actually happen in real time. If you don't type in anything, then every 30 seconds every character still proceeds with their actions. I will be honest, what made me most interested in checking out this game is the story of how in one player's walkthrough, Bard, Thorin and Gandalf all perished, but they still managed to kill Smaug using Gollum's dead body. This sounds amazing, but sadly I never even got to Smaug, because The Hobbit is one of those games that is absolutely fantastic when all pieces come together, but when they don't, it transforms into a pretty broken experience. The Hobbit is technically an open-world game. All its screens form a huge interconnected web with different pathways, shortcuts and means to reach certain places. For example, the first time I played, I managed to reach Mirkwood without even entering the Goblin Caves, which means I didn't even get the ring. That's pretty cool. And the ring is not really mandatory either, because The Hobbit is also a systemic game. Your goal is to go there and back again, there's a wooden chest in the very first screen and back end, and you finish the game when you put the treasure from the Lonely Mountain in that chest. How that is done is up to you. And the whims of the game, of course, as all NPCs have their own AI. Now it should be mentioned that by current standards it's not a terribly complex AI, and there aren't that many NPCs, for example the only dwarf that wasn't cut out from the story is Thorin himself, but it's still incredibly impressive for 1982, and there is enough going on to create a lot of dynamic situations. These situations can be really awesome. There's the Smaug killed by Gollum's dead body story I told before. Out of my personal experiences, I once asked Gandalf to go to the trolls, steal their key and go open their hideout, and then I followed him and watched him actually do all that. That is seriously cool stuff. When I got captured in Mirkwood, after waiting for some time, Thorin was also captured and thrown in with me. I waited until the elf opened the door to our cell, went out through the open door, and then in trying to think what I can do to not get captured again as I don't have the ring, I asked Thorin to kill the elf, and he did that. Okay, that one is a pretty cruel example, but you can see how these systems can interact in really nice ways. But a lot of the time, the systems don't gel well together that great. Once, Gandalf took away the map I needed to show to Elrond and just went on his way somewhere. I had to follow him and ask to return the map, and this is a game where NPCs at times can just say no to your requests. In general, Gandalf likes to steal a lot, and not just from Bilbo. One time he took a key from Thorin and Thorin had to take it back. Then there was a time when I got thrown into the elves' prison in Mirkwood, where the elves have managed to capture a goblin. And goblins, when they see you, they capture you and throw into their prison in a totally different place in the Misty Mountains, and there is no condition that will prevent a goblin in captivity from doing that. And escaping that goblin prison is a big pain. If you're unlucky like me, it will take you literally hours to do so. There is about 5 goblins roaming the caves, so there is no way of knowing if there will be one in the room you're going to, and when they see you, they throw you into their cell, which you can't escape without Thorin because you're too little to reach a certain window. On one playthrough, I had to wait a lot while Thorin was doing something, I guess. I honestly didn't even know if he was alive. He could be dead and I wouldn't even know it. Eventually, he arrived to help me, but the possibility of getting permanently stuck was real. You can see that mostly I've been talking about personal stories rather than particular mechanics. It's difficult to talk about systems in this game because they're not transparent at all, and even with experimentation it's tricky to figure out the effects of any particular action. For example, I have gathered that eating food increases your strength and fighting with enemies makes you weaker, but to what extent I don't know. I also don't know what influences NPC behavior. Thorin tends to follow us most of the time, except sometimes he doesn't. Gandalf just roams about from place to place, seemingly without any goal, but sometimes you find that he carries an object with him. How did he find it? Why did he take it? When? Or like in my story where a goblin got captured by the elves. I honestly don't know how that has happened since I have never seen a goblin roam outside of Misty Mountains, nor did I see any elf get outside of Mirkwood, and yet, somehow, they met. The Hobbit is indeed set up in such a way to make sure that no single playthrough is ever the same, and you get your own adventures, memories that are unique to your story, the way you played, and how events have managed to unfold. This is seriously amazing stuff, but there is also not enough systems in place to prevent confusion and frustration. It doesn't help that the text parser interface is both advanced enough to understand really complex sentences, but is not intricate enough, so you still need to use some very specific ways to achieve your goals. For example, you can add adjectives to your actions that affect the way you do things, including probability of success, like throwing a rope carefully, but you can't hide in barrels. Or you can't ask Elrond to read the map, you need to say to Elrond, read map. Which is another thing, as a player you don't really have any way of knowing that Elrond has to help you with the map unless you have read the book. The game doesn't provide mandatory knowledge to understand your goals and the logic of some actions. To be fair, back in the day this adventure would actually come alongside copies of The Hobbit, or alternatively forms that you could fill to order the book itself for free, so there were attempts to make sure players gain the necessary context, but I would rather have Gandalf say that Lord Elrond can read the curious map he gave us, than have the precious text bytes be filled with sentences how Thorin sings about gold again as time passes. So with everything taken into account, I will assign a 6 to The Hobbit. It is a curious game, very ambitious, incredibly complex for like what, 50 kilobytes of space, full of possibilities of creating awesome player stories, but also easily broken, at times unclear, and doesn't have enough systems in place to reach its full potential. But it takes absolutely the right approach in how to tackle a video game adaptation, and I really appreciate it for that. It's got a lot of amazing things going for it, but also too much bringing it down. And that's a shame. Time to get on to the next category, context. This category is about everything that provides context for player actions, characters, motivation, world storytelling, be it direct or environmental, and so on. The weight of this category is 1, as most of the time context is something that enhances the experience but doesn't necessarily define it. Even though The Hobbit is based on the book, the source material has no bearing on this category. We will discuss only how the game managed to tackle context on its own. And, well, there is not much I can say. The manual provides you with main motivation, that's pretty much it. NPCs don't have any character traits, although Thorin does love to sing about gold, so there's that. The way the world works is unclear unless you have read the book. I don't think the game ever tells you the ring makes you invisible, you just are if you decide to wear it. And I don't even mention the character arcs or themes from the book, since you will find none of that here. But what is definitely a huge strength of The Hobbit is the player stories it can generate, which is great in its own, but extremely powerful when combined with the knowledge of the source material. And there is something about the fact that you don't feel like you're controlled by the book's narrative, but just like Bilbo, you're finding your own way through this crazy adventure, and that's definitely a big plus. So if we take a look at all the potential scores for the context category, I will assign a 6 to The Hobbit in its game form. The game doesn't do much beyond providing a general understanding of what you're doing, some things are not explained at all, but the power of personal, dynamic, unique stories can't be denied. Let's move on to aesthetics. The weight of this category is also 1, since it is again more about enhancing the experience, this time through visual style, sounds, music, and other aesthetically pleasing things. The Hobbit is a text adventure. Most of the things are represented through text, though each screen, at least in the C64 disc version, does come with an image corresponding to the location. The pictures themselves are quite nice, and honestly the longer loading caused by technical necessities actually creates this feeling of everything being painted right in front of your eyes, and that's a pretty cool effect. The text descriptions and dialogues range from being pretty expressive to something really rudimentary. I have a feeling that was caused by memory limitations and the need to fit everything in. The C64 disc version also has music. With the exception of a couple tracks, it is not really memorable, but while you're playing it does enhance the experience and changes according to the mood of the location you're in, which is quite nice. So if we take a look at the breakdown of scoring for aesthetics, I will assign a 6. There is a nice feeling of going through an interactive adventure book as images get drawn right in front of your eyes, and the music sets up the necessary mood, but nothing much beyond that. The next category is Cohesion. So this category has a weight of 2 and is all about how well the game connects all its elements together to form a wholesome experience where all aspects preferably play off each other. And by and large, the Hobbit's systems create a lot of random stuff. Like when Gandalf takes a key away from you, wonders what it is for and goes away. It's kind of funny, but doesn't lead to any cohesion. I once found Thorin in a cell alongside a dead warg. I don't know what happened. In fact, a lot of things just happened. And yet, as I've mentioned in the design section, sometimes it clicks. Sometimes you do feel like you go on an adventure, just like Bilbo has, and solve different problems in a variety of ways. That's why, if we take a look at the score breakdown of the Cohesion category, I will assign a 6. There's clearly a direction the developers wanted to take the game in. Sure, a lot of times the systems make the game feel random, but I have to commend the direction. We get to our final category, emotions. This category has a weight of 3, as even though it is entirely subjective, personal feelings matter a lot when playing a game. And my feelings about The Hobbit were interesting. There was a sense of wonder from seeing what's going to happen and discovering curious things, but there was also a lot of frustration because the goblin has captured me for the 50th time and I just can't escape this damn cave while Thorin keeps singing about gold. Sometimes I felt very smart improvising on the spot how to deal with a certain situation, but then I couldn't make Elrond read the damn map. He would sometimes say no and sometimes the game would just not accept my commands. The farthest I got was Lake Town, but then I realized I left Thorin in captivity of the elves and started backtracking to find my way back to him. I didn't have the ring with me, so there was no way to protect myself from spiders that I have managed to avoid thanks to elves capturing us in the first place. Eventually, those spiders tracking me with their bulbous eyes killed me. The Hobbit game is as engrossing as it is frustrating, and if you take a look at ratings for emotions, the score for that precise feeling is 7. I kept trying and trying to have a full journey to go there and back again because the magic was there. But that magic was frequently destroyed by the game just doing its own thing because it wants to, I guess. And with that said, it is time to summarize everything. After calculating all scores with their respective weights, the final Stasocritic rating for The Hobbit is 59. And Stasocritic is not Metacritic. 50 is fine, positive, alright. The Hobbit is a game that sadly fails to meet its ambitions, but by Durin's beard, I'll be damned if those ambitions aren't worth a recommendation anyway. If you're interested in checking out curious projects from the past, The Hobbit should definitely be on your list. But if you're expecting a full-fledged, proper systemic experience, you won't find it here, sadly. But still, and I can't stress this enough, the direction of The Hobbit is how you adapt other mediums into games, and what you can still learn from it as a developer. If The Hobbit would just have been a linear puzzle adventure creating all chapters of the book, it would probably have turned out to be higher quality, but at the expense of doing everything that makes games unique. As flawed as it is, The Hobbit is not just you repeating the events of the book you already know. The Hobbit is you stepping out of Bag End to go on your own adventure.